A dense alien jungle stretched endlessly under a canopy of violet-hued leaves, the air thick with the hum of unseen creatures. The sound of boots crunching through undergrowth shattered the natural cadence. Commander Rail moved with calculated precision, his squad of Galactic Empire soldiers forming an unyielding wall of discipline behind him. Their mission was clear: apprehend and interrogate any human operatives daring to tread on Imperial soil. Rail's crimson uniform glinted under the filtered sunlight, a testament to his rank and unflinching loyalty to the Empire. He raised a hand, signaling a halt. His sharp, metallic eyes scanned the area, their augmented enhancements detecting faint heat signatures beyond the ridge. A human patrol, exactly as the informants had claimed, spread out, flanked them from the east and south. Rail commanded in a clipped tone. His voice carried the weight of authority, leaving no room for hesitation. Soldiers dispersed silently, shadows melding with the alien flora. Rail himself advanced toward the ridge, confident in the inevitability of Imperial superiority. Beyond the rise, Lieutenant Jake Mason crouched low amidst the underbrush, his camouflage uniform blending seamlessly with the terrain. His breathing was steady, his focus razor-sharp. Years of Navy SEAL training had honed him into a weapon, one far more lethal than the Empire could fathom. Yet, even Mason's instincts whispered caution as he felt the shift in the air, a predator's presence. "Stay sharp," Mason murmured into his comm. The two soldiers flanking him nodded, their grip on their rifles tightening. Before any further instructions could be issued, chaos erupted. Blinding flashes of light exploded around them, Imperial blasters cutting through the jungle with merciless efficiency. Mason rolled to cover, his heart pounding, but his mind cold and calculating. He fired back, each shot precise, buying time for his men to retreat. But the Empire's ambush was flawless. Within minutes, his comrades lay incapacitated, their cries muffled by the oppressive weight of defeat. Mason's rifle hissed empty. "Surrender." Rail's voice cut through the carnage, sharp and unyielding. Mason's jaw tightened, his hand hovering over the combat knife strapped to his thigh. He weighed his odds, the calculations grim. Finally, he raised his hands, his expression betraying nothing. Two soldiers roughly seized him, binding his hands behind his back with restraints that hissed as they locked. Rail approached, his gaze appraising Mason with clinical detachment. "You're remarkably composed for a human," he remarked. "Perhaps you're intelligent enough to make this easy." Mason remained silent, his steely eyes locking onto Rail's. The Empire's commander smirked, mistaking the silence for submission. "Take him aboard," Rail ordered. "We'll see how long that defiance lasts." Hours later, Mason found himself in the sterile confines of an Imperial cruiser, the walls gleaming with a cold, lifeless sheen. The interrogation chamber was minimalist, its only furnishings a chair bolted to the floor and a single table separating him from his captor. Rail entered, flanked by two guards who stood like statues near the door. "Name and rank," Rail began, his tone almost bored. "Lieutenant Jake Mason," Mason replied evenly. He didn't elaborate, offering nothing more than the bare minimum required by the military code of conduct. Rail's lips curled into a faint smile. "Cooperative. Good. Now, tell me about Earth's defenses. Fleet compositions, planetary shields, anything worth knowing." Mason tilted his head, feigning a thoughtful pause. "I'm just a grunt," he said finally. "You've got the wrong guy." Rail's smile faded. "Lying will not serve you, Lieutenant." Mason's silence was his only response. Rail's patience thinned. With a subtle nod, he signaled one of the guards. The man approached, delivering a sharp blow to Mason's abdomen. Mason grunted but kept his composure, his gaze unwavering as he met Rail's eyes. The commander leaned forward, his tone soft but menacing. "You are not the first human we've interrogated. Everyone breaks eventually." Unbeknownst to Rail, Mason was not like everyone else. Years of grueling training had conditioned him to endure pain, deprivation, and psychological manipulation. As the interrogation continued, Mason employed subtle tactics to mislead his captors. He spoke in half-truths, feeding them useless information while observing their procedures and noting the weaknesses in their security. Rail, for all his cunning, failed to see the cracks forming in his operation. He dismissed Mason as unremarkable, a mere pawn in the larger game of galactic domination. To Rail, the human soldier was just another primitive being, incapable of posing a genuine threat. That night, Mason sat in his cell, his mind working tirelessly. He had memorized the guard rotation, the sound of the locks, even the faint hum of the ship's energy core. He knew he couldn't afford to wait long. The Empire's arrogance was his greatest weapon, but it wouldn't last forever. As the dim lights of the cruiser flickered to their nighttime setting, Mason's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Rail thought the game was over, but Mason knew better. The game had only just begun. The metallic clink of the restraints echoed in the small cell as Jake Mason leaned against the cold wall, his eyes closed but his mind racing. The low hum of the Imperial cruiser systems vibrated faintly through the floor, a constant reminder of his precarious position. Hours had passed since his interrogation, and the bruises on his ribs throbbed with a dull ache. Yet, pain was an old friend, a minor inconvenience compared to the stakes at hand. He opened his eyes, sharp and calculating. The guard outside his cell, a young Imperial soldier with a stiff posture, shifted uncomfortably under Mason's gaze. Jake had spent the better part of the day observing the shifts, noting the rhythm of their patrols and the moments when security slackened. He had also noticed a faint discrepancy in the cell's locking mechanism, a slight delay in the magnetic seal's engagement that could be exploited with the right timing. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A distant alarm blared briefly, signaling some minor system glitch elsewhere on the ship. The guard's attention flickered, his hand moving to his communicator. It was enough. Mason sprang into action, his movements fluid and precise. He dislocated his thumb with practiced ease, wincing only slightly as he slipped free of the restraints. With a swift, silent step, he reached the guard before the young man could react, pulling him into the cell and rendering him unconscious with a chokehold. Mason retrieved the guard's access card and weapon, his expression grim. The clock had started ticking. He moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors, avoiding security cameras and sticking to blind spots he'd identified earlier. Each step was deliberate, his SEAL training guiding him like second nature. The cruiser's layout was unfamiliar, but Mason relied on intuition and observation, mapping his route as he went. Turning a corner, he encountered two more guards. They were speaking in low tones, unaware of his approach. Mason acted without hesitation, using the element of surprise to dispatch them with brutal efficiency. The sound of their bodies hitting the floor was muffled by the hum of the ship. He dragged them into a storage room, pausing only to arm himself further with their blasters and a small knife. The ship's armory was his next target. Mason knew he couldn't face the full might of the Imperial forces without evening the odds. Navigating through the labyrinthine corridors, he finally reached a secure door marked with the Empire's insignia. A keypad glowed faintly beside it. He accessed the terminal using the stolen card, overriding the security protocols with surprising ease. Either the Empire underestimated its prisoners, or this sector of the ship wasn't as secure as it should have been. Either way, it was their mistake. Inside, rows of weapons and equipment lined the walls, a treasure trove of Imperial technology. Mason's eyes swept over the options before settling on a compact plasma rifle and a set of small, portable explosives. He also grabbed a tactical visor, slipping it over his eyes to enhance his vision and provide a map of the ship's immediate vicinity. Time was running out, but he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. He wasn't just escaping. He was about to make the Empire regret ever crossing him. With his new arsenal, Mason moved toward the ship's control center. Disabling the cruiser's core systems would not only facilitate his escape, but send a clear message to the Empire. Humans were not to be underestimated. Along the way, he encountered more resistance. Guards shouted commands and fired their blasters, But Mason's movements were a blur of calculated aggression. He used the ship's architecture to his advantage, ducking behind bulkheads and utilizing reflective surfaces to disorient his enemies. Each encounter left a trail of incapacitated soldiers in his wake. The control center loomed ahead, its reinforced doors flanked by two heavily armed guards. Mason assessed the situation, his mind racing. Direct confrontation was a risk, but he had no other choice. He set one of the explosives against a nearby junction box, programming a 10-second delay. As the guards turned toward the sound of the explosion, Mason struck. The ensuing skirmish was brief but intense, leaving him breathing heavily as the doors to the control center slid open. Inside, a group of Imperial officers scrambled to react, their surprise evident. Mason fired a warning shot, the plasma bolt scorching the console nearest to the commanding officer. "Step away," Mason ordered, his voice cold and commanding. The officers hesitated but complied, raising their hands as they moved to the edges of the room. Mason's fingers flew over the control panel, his tactical visor feeding him real-time data. He initiated a cascade failure in the ship's systems, disabling weapons, propulsion, and communications. Alarms blared throughout the cruiser, the once imposing vessel now reduced to chaos. Satisfied, Mason turned to the officers, his gaze steely. "Tell your commander that Earth is off limits. Next time, we won't just defend ourselves. We'll come for you." With that, he set the remaining explosives on a timed detonation and exited the control center, sealing the doors behind him. The path to the escape pods was fraught with resistance, but Mason's momentum was unstoppable. Each step carried him closer to freedom, his determination burning brighter than ever. As he launched the pod into the vast expanse of space, Mason watched the Imperial cruiser shrink in the viewport. Moments later, a series of bright explosions rippled through the ship, tearing it apart from within. He allowed himself a rare smile, a flicker of triumph in his otherwise stoic demeanor. The Empire had made a grave mistake in capturing him, and now they knew it. The pod's navigation system beeped, plotting a course back to Earth. Mason leaned back in the cramped seat, his mind already racing ahead. This was far from over. The Empire would retaliate, and humanity needed to be ready. For now, though, he had done what no one thought possible. He had taken on the Galactic Empire and won, and he wasn't finished yet. The escape pod's entry into Earth's atmosphere was a fiery streak across the dawn sky, heralding the return of Jake Mason. His descent ended with a controlled crash into a barren stretch of desert, the pod systems hissing and groaning as they cooled. Mason forced the hatch open and climbed out, his body aching but his resolve unbroken. The dusty air filled his lungs, a stark contrast to the sterile confines of the Imperial cruiser. He was home, but his mission was far from over. Within hours, Mason was retrieved by a covert Earth military unit, their dark vehicles kicking up plumes of sand as they converged on his location. He was whisked away to a secure base, his presence cloaked in secrecy. As he entered the debriefing room, the weight of his actions began to settle. The room was stark and functional, dominated by a long table surrounded by high-ranking officers. Their eyes, sharp with curiosity and suspicion, followed Mason as he took his seat. "Lieutenant Mason," General Harrington began, his voice gravelly with years of command. "You've got a lot to explain." Mason recounted everything: the ambush, his capture, the interrogation, and his subsequent escape. His words were measured, each detail precise. He described the Empire's advanced technology, their arrogance, and their glaring vulnerabilities. As he spoke, the room grew quieter, the gravity of his account sinking in. When he finished, Harrington leaned back, his expression grim. "You've given us invaluable intel," the general said. "But you've also painted a target on Earth's back. The Empire won't take this lightly." Mason's gaze was unwavering. "They already saw us as a threat. Now they'll think twice before underestimating us." The general nodded, though the lines of worry on his face remained. "We'll need to act fast. This war is coming whether we're ready or not." The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Mason's insight spurred a wave of innovation and preparation. Engineers worked tirelessly to adapt the stolen Imperial technology he had smuggled back. Training programs intensified, with soldiers drilling relentlessly to match the ferocity and precision of their enemy. Mason, though reluctant to take the spotlight, became a central figure in the efforts. His first-hand experience made him a valuable asset, his presence a constant reminder of the stakes. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of the galaxy, Commander Rail stood before the Emperor. The Imperial throne room was an intimidating expanse of black stone and cold light, the Emperor's silhouette a shadow against the vast backdrop of stars. Rail's failure to secure the human prisoner had not gone unnoticed. You let one man dismantle an entire cruiser. The Emperor's voice was a low rumble, each word laced with menace. Explain yourself. Rail's head bowed, his usually sharp demeanor subdued. He was unexpected. Their kind is more resourceful than we believed. Resourceful? The Emperor's tone turned icy. Or dangerous? Rail hesitated. Both, Your Majesty. The Emperor's silence was oppressive, stretching long enough for Rail to feel its full weight. Finally he spoke. Prepare the fleet. Earth must be reminded of its place. Back on Earth, Mason found himself restless. Despite the progress being made, he couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. He spent hours in the training facilities, pushing himself to his limits alongside the recruits. His leadership was unspoken but undeniable, his presence inspiring those around him to strive harder. Yet, when the lights dimmed and the base quieted, Mason's thoughts turned inward. Memories of his capture, the faces of his fallen comrades, and the looming threat of the Empire haunted him. One evening, as he stood on the observation deck overlooking the sprawling desert, Harrington joined him. The general's weathered face was softened by the dim light, his usual sternness replaced with a rare moment of candor. You've done more than anyone could have asked, Harrington said. But you're carrying too much alone. Let the others shoulder some of it. Mason's jaw tightened. I can't afford to let up. Not when I know what's coming. Harrington placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. We're all in this together. Remember that. Before Mason could respond, an alarm blared, the sharp sound cutting through the night. Both men turned, their expressions hardening. A communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom. Unidentified vessel approaching Earth's atmosphere. The base erupted into action. Mason and Harrington rushed to the command center, where screens displayed the approaching ship. Its design was unmistakably Imperial, its sleek lines and ominous glow a stark contrast to Earth's more utilitarian crafts. The room buzzed with tension as officers scrambled to assess the situation. What's their intent? Harrington demanded. No communications yet, sir, an officer replied. But they're not cloaked. It's almost like they want us to see them. Mason's eyes narrowed as he studied the vessel. It's a message. They're testing us. Harrington nodded grimly. Scramble the interceptors. Let's see if they're ready for the fight they've started. As the base mobilized, Mason felt a familiar surge of adrenaline. This was it. The beginning of what he'd feared and anticipated. The Empire's shadow loomed larger than ever, but Mason refused to let it consume him. Earth would stand, and he would be at the forefront of the battle. There was no other choice.